Hello and welcome to the Paid Media Lab podcast. My name is James. I'm the content lead here at Lunio, and in this episode, I'll be speaking with Lucy Smith, who is the head of search at Incubator, one of the leading marketing agencies here in the UK, with offices in more than 18 locations around the world. Lucy has more than 8 years experience managing campaigns and crafting client strategies across paid search, paid social, and programmatic channels. In this conversation, Lucy outlines how you can implement a demand-led bidding strategy whereby you let the level of demand within a market at that particular time dictate your ad spend rather than setting a fixed budget constraint and trying to work within that. With that said, let's get into how you can make demand-led bidding work for your business. Lucy, welcome to the Paid Media Lab. Very glad to have you here with us today.
Thank you for having me.
The main topic that we will be unpacking is demand-led bidding. But while we're on the topic of PMax, I just wanted to very quickly get your thoughts on the new batch of PMax controls that Google launched in January 2025. So we had the rollout of campaign level negative keywords, which has been a long time coming. We had the addition of the new high value new customer mode, where PMax will try to bid higher on new customers it believes are likely to have the highest lifetime value. And before we switched on the mics, you were also telling me about an update to the search terms or search themes and some of the insights that you can get associated with those. So on a kind of top level, what was your response to that new package of updates that Google pushed out at the start of this year?
Yeah, I think a nice little post-Christmas present. I didn't say any of them were earth-shattering, but all of them are nice little additions to have in the toolbox, as it were. I think, campaign level negatives, that they announced that a long time ago, so it's just actually getting that rolled out to advertisers at scale will be good. In terms of the search themes insights, we've actually had quite a lot of back and forth recently in terms of are the search themes actually helping us or are they causing more cannibalization? So getting more insights into actually what those search themes are doing, I think will be really useful. So I think there's a new score where it's going to kind of show you what actual impact your search themes are having on your campaign. So are they doing anything? Are we wasting time adding them in, or actually are they bringing in a lot of volume? So I think that will be a really good one to see. And then, high value customers. There's a few different sort of bidding options around new customers in PMax. And I think they're all quite specific. So having more of them means that we're able to cover more sort of business asks from clients. So having that extra lifetime value element is going to be really valuable for some people. But it's very dependent on what people's goals are. So I think it's going to be really useful for some people. Other people, it might be the other features that have already been released, or there may still be some to come that we can kind of ask Google for.
And so as I mentioned, we're going to be getting into demand-led bidding, and makes sense to start from the beginning. So could you just outline in simple terms what demand-led bidding is and why it's still important in 2025?
Yeah, definitely. So I think sometimes there are a couple of different ways people look at demand-led bidding. So what I'm talking about in this context is letting your budget be determined by the demand that is in the market. So rather than having a fixed target, what we usually use is a fixed budget. What we usually use is a target, so like a target ROAS or a target CPA. And as long as we're hitting that efficiency target, then we let the spend do what it will, essentially. So we're not sort of tied to, okay, we're going to spend £200,000 this month. It's as long as we hit a ROAS of £10, then we'll spend whatever we can. And I think it's really important in 2025 because so many marketing teams are being asked to do more with less, whether that's from a resource perspective, whether it's from a budget perspective. And this really allows you to make the most of limited budgets, this approach, because you're maximizing your spend when the intent and the demand is there, but it works on the inverse as well. So when the demand is not there, when the customer intent is not there, you're not just spending money for the sake of it. So you're really able to phase your spend and be agile and be there when the demand is there in the market. And that can really help you get a leg up on your competition, basically.
Yeah, it's a really good point. Just thinking about our own context at Lunio, obviously we're a B2B SaaS business, and probably unsurprising, the demand just vanishes in December to the point where there's just absolutely nothing there. And if we were to continue spending at the same rate that we would at other times of the year, it just doesn't make sense, as you pointed out. And then, you come back into January, the first 2 weeks are pretty quiet, and then starts to really ramp up again in terms of the demand getting into the end of January into February. And that's when it makes sense to kind of spend more aggressively when you can capitalize on that demand. So obviously I've talked about it there from a B2B SaaS perspective, but are there any other types of businesses or industries that you think can benefit the most from this kind of approach to bidding?
Yeah. So I would actually say, I would say be careful from a Lunio perspective, because I would imagine your sort of conversion path is quite long in terms of first touch point to actually, signing someone on. And where we tend to see it work best, this demand-led bidding, is when people have a shorter sales cycle, because you want your demand trends to be quite closely aligned with your conversion trends for it to work best. I would also say, you just want a decent number of conversions. So if you've got a really small account and you don't make a conversion every day, probably not the best strategy to use. But yeah, where we see it work really well, decent volumes, short conversion pathways, and clients that are using value-based bidding. So they're pulling through some form of a conversion value, whether that's, obviously that lends itself to e-com really well, but for lead gen clients that are using lead scoring, you can look at it from that perspective as well. But that tends to be kind of where we see the sweet spot in terms of who it does well for. And obviously the inverse is true, right? So if you've got very few conversions, you have a long conversion pathway, and you just have static values that you're pulling through, it's less likely to work for you.
Yeah. So just on that point about the the kind of first party data that you would be feeding into Google and that kind of value-based bidding approach. So what types of data, and are there any information about market conditions that you would be thinking about as you're kind of approaching that demand-led strategy?
Yeah, so I mean, it doesn't sit completely separate to your other strategies, right? So if your strategy is we want to go after new customers only and we want to suppress anyone that we've already got in our database, you'd still do that. Likewise, if you really want to double down on members, you're gonna go after those people. At a basic level, in terms of sort of external factors, your bidding is probably going to be looking at seasonality, market events, what your competitors are doing. That's going to be included in the bidding algorithm and what it's choosing to do. But depending on the bidding platform that you're using, you can also add those additional signals in to sort of direct it if you know that something's going to be going on that's going to impact your sales. If you're really weather dependent, for example, and you wanted to pull that in, but it does vary platform to platform in terms of what additional sort of data points you can give it, and whether you do that in the form of we change the value of the conversion that comes through, or whether you literally say on this day sales are just not going to happen, they're not going to be as valuable. So there's a few different options that you can use, but at a basic level, if you're using a Google Ads bid strategy, it's going to be pulling in things, or it's going to be taking into account things like seasonality, market events, and what the other competitors in the auction are doing.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so if it was a case of, let's just take a business that is heavily weather dependent, and that is something that they want to factor in, is it the case of you're changing the conversion values when the weather is good, if those are the times where you're going to sell more, or what is it exactly that you're going to feed in based on the weather?
Yeah, so I'm not a technological expert by any means, but I think when you would be changing the values, it's more would be in terms of this is the type of customer. So for example, you might know that people you get in over Black Friday are not good for you long term in terms of lifetime value, versus someone that purchases in March. They're gonna stay for a long time, or people that buy into a certain category come back, whereas people that buy into a different category don't. So like, that's when I would change the conversion values potentially, because you want to reflect that sort of lifetime value element. The weather I would just factor more into the bidding. So generally the weather's not going to have too much of an impact on like a person by person basis, but it's more of like generally how you want the bidder to behave.
Yeah, that makes a lot more sense to me now. Thank you for clearing that up. In your own experience at the incubator, are there any examples that kind of stand out to you as clients that where you implemented this demand as strategy and it kind of really helped drive an increase in performance?
Yeah, definitely. I unfortunately can't name names.
That's okay.
But yeah, there's definitely at least one standout client to me where they really went through the whole journey. So, demand-led bidding, it definitely is a journey that you have to go on, and you have to take the business with you because you have to rely on other stakeholders. So first step is almost always get finance on board, because they're the ones that hold the purse strings ultimately. They have to be behind this plan, otherwise they're just going to turn the taps off. So they got the finance team on board. We upskilled where we needed to, and we really had those discussions so that everyone was bought in. Then I guess they also kind of looked at the forecasting side of things. So realistically, you're not going to have a business that will just be like, yeah, spend what you want. We don't need to know what that will be. There is always going to be that element, right, that you have to sort of say, we're expecting that we'll spend this much. And, they came to agreement, and we've seen with other advertisers where you sort of say, this is what we think we're going to spend, but we're all on the same page that we might not spend that, right? We might spend more, we might spend less. It's going to depend on what actually happens performance-wise. And, people will have agreements like, if we spend more than X% over what we forecast, that's when we have to go back to finance and get that signed off, for example. But you've got that wiggle room within your forecast numbers. So yes, getting finance on side, doing the forecasting, setting a realistic target. Your ROAS target, it just needs to work for you, and it needs to work for the business, right? It needs to reflect what you need to see from a profitability angle, but it also needs to be realistic in terms of what you see in your ads account currently. So if you're currently working at a £5 ROAS and you suddenly say, okay, we can do demand led, but it has to be at £10 ROAS, you're not going to drive any growth because you're trying to make yourself so much more efficient that you're just going to lose the volume. Equally, if the business needs a £5 ROAS to function, you can't set a £2 ROAS, because again, in a month's time, finance is going to be like, what the hell are you doing? So setting that target at an appropriate level, really, really important. And then the final part, which is sometimes the trickiest part, is like making peace with just not touching things as much as you might want to. Demand-led bidding is so reliant on bidding algorithms, bid strategies, and knee-jerk reactions is like your enemy here. So, ideally allowing a conversion cycle to pass before you make any changes. Doesn't always work like that. I'm 100% aware. And you do sometimes have those business situations where you have to make a change quickly. The budgets have to come down for some reason, or, you need to push because stores aren't doing well, something like that. And there are ways to do that without having too much of a negative impact. But I would say, yeah, they did it all really, really well. And last year we saw revenue more than double for them using that demand-led approach. And obviously we were doing many other things as well to improve their campaigns. But, it meant that we were agile, and we knew at any moment in time, given the efficiency constraints we needed to hit for the business, we weren't leaving anything on the table because we had this approach. And in a year where a lot of businesses didn't have a great time, the fact that we were able to more than double our revenue, I think, speaks volumes.
Yeah, and I think in your answer there, I think you really touched on some of the kind of key potential pitfalls and kind of traps that people might fall into when they're trying this strategy. And I think the point that you made just about those knee-jerk reactions, to my mind, that's probably one of the biggest potential challenges to overcome, because it can be very tempting to just see, oh, things aren't going in the right direction, or we need to action that immediately. You said wait till the end of the conversion cycle. And is that entirely dependent on the business, how long you would wait before you decide to make a change? Yeah.
Yeah, so basically, if it takes someone 7 days to convert, don't make a decision within those 7 days.
Right.
Would be like the general gist. That's why we say you want a shorter sales cycle. And that's because if someone's taking a month to convert, realistically, you can't say, oh, we're not going to make any changes for a month. So, that's kind of like the trade-off.
And just thinking about this from like an agency perspective, and obviously you're managing accounts on behalf of clients, and does adopting this kind of strategy require a lot of upfront communication and expectation setting on your part before you kind of get going with it? And have you ever run into trouble with that side of things?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's expectation setting with the client, but then the client also setting expectations internally with their other stakeholders as well. It's a lot of communicating. And I think, where we do often come up back against it is, they've been given the directive from their CEO, we need to pull back massively. For example, if you make that change in a bid strategy, it's going to take a few days to show, and they might need that to happen now. So a lot of the work that we've been doing is working with partners, working with Google, Microsoft, working with the client to work out how can we make those changes that are going to have the least negative impact on performance and on the bid strategy. So one thing we've seen work really well is using seasonal adjustments for that. So traditionally what you'd usually use a seasonal adjustment on a bid strategy for is, so say you've got a big sale coming up and you want it to react immediately to that sale going live. You say, we expect conversion rate to go up by 50% over these days, and then go back down again. So the bid strategy knows ahead of time, okay, I really need to push the bids on these days. What we've been using them for is basically pretending that something's happening. So like if we need to pull back spend, we say, we think conversion rate is going to drop 50% over these next few days. So automatically pull back really strongly, rather than you increase the ROAS target and it takes, a week to bring those bids down. It will make the changes much more quickly. So we've seen that work quite well to make those more immediate changes without having like long-term impacts on how the bid algorithm works.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And just like thinking specifically about those conversations you've been having with partners at Google and Microsoft, and using that seasonality adjustment as a kind of workaround for this, are there any other kind of technical considerations or limitations, primarily within Google Ads, but maybe there might be something about Microsoft that's different in relation to this? But is there anything that people should be aware of, within the platforms themselves?
I think probably that main thing is that bid strategy responsiveness. It is going to take a while, and just being careful of not, you get that directive on Monday, you make a change, you don't see anything happen, so you make more of a change. You increase that change on Tuesday, you increase that change on Wednesday. What you can get is you almost end up with like this slingshot effect. So you get to the end of the week, and over the weekend you spend like nothing, because you've got that like compound effect of all those changes you made at the start. And so then you've almost got to make a load more changes at the start of the next week to compensate for that. So that I would say, we've had to do quite a lot of thinking and work around like how we prevent that essentially. And I guess it's a bit of a limitation just in terms of that conversion cycle piece around, you don't want to be making too many changes within that. Those are probably like the main ones. I guess like the other technical things just to like think about, obviously you're tracking, but you also want a look back window that makes sense for you as well. So going back to that example, if you've got a 7-day conversion pathway, don't set your look back window to be 24 hours because you're just losing everything that happens after that first day, which is the majority of your sales. But likewise, if most of your sales, 99% of your sales happen in 7 days, you don't need a 90-day look back window because that's just unnecessarily long. So making sure you've got the look back window set appropriately as well, I'd say, is important. And then if you are using, I guess, like a less standard way of tracking your conversion. So, for example, if you're not using the Google Ads tag, but you are passing back offline information into the platform, for example, make sure you're updating that every day. You know, you don't want your bidding algorithms to be making decisions based on data that's 7 days old or like 2 weeks old. You're just not going to get good results from it. So with the offline conversions, definitely at least a daily upload to get those in.
Yeah, and just thinking about the management of that and just about the management of the whole process, are there any tools or scripts or things that you would recommend that can make life a bit easier in relation to the management of things like passing back that data on a relatively constant basis?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of tools, I'd probably put it in like 3 buckets, as it were. So anything that's going to help you with forecasting, because you're going to have to do that quite regularly. So, for example, performance planner in Google Ads at a basic. You know, that can help you see the size of the opportunity, right, and how much you could be spending. And that will be based off data in your account. So it's quite helpful. I would say with that, it will probably get more useful as you go along, because it will kind of have more of that data to build on. It will have seen you've spent at this level and you've achieved this. So it's got more to work off. From the second kind of category, I guess, would be like reporting and insights. So just making sure that you've got good reporting. You know, whether you're using like a Looker dashboard or you've got it linked up to, you know, Funnel or one of those other platforms. Just knowing where, because, you know, at the end of the day, a demand-led bidding approach quite often results in you spending more money, right? So you need to know where that money is going and you need to understand what's performing and what's not performing. Because ultimately you're looking at that top line ROAS, but you might have stuff in a specific campaign that's absolutely bombing. But because other stuff's overperforming, it's balancing it out. And actually, if you took out that lower performing stuff, you could drive more volume for the same ROAS. So making sure you've got those insights. And then I guess the third sort of group would be those efficiency tools. So Lunio, you know, making sure that you're not wasting any of that extra budget on invalid traffic. You know, even like a micro script, for example, for PMax, understanding what's doing well, where you're showing your ads, PMaximiser, for example, to see what creative's doing well. You know, ultimately you're looking at that
Sorry,
top line.
could you just explain what PMaximiser is? I know Mike Rose, and shout out to him, but what is PMaximiser?
Yeah, so PMaximiser is a dashboard that you can build. I think it's on GitHub. I think Google released it. But essentially it links into your Google Ads API, and it's basically gives you a dashboard of different best practice elements. So it might show you that you're missing, I don't know, a square image, a portrait image, and a landscape video. And if you added those extra assets in, that would improve your quality score. So it just helps give you more insights into like creative and how you can be, like what levers you could be pulling from that perspective. Google are now adding more and more of these things into the UI, but PMaximiser has been a useful tool for us when we haven't had that visibility in platform.
Yeah, and thank you for mentioning the new. I think, especially for businesses that have a high cost per click, that definitely can work out quite well. You're spending $10, £10 or more. So I think like we've covered a lot of ground there, and I'm just conscious of time. So before we wrap up, you know, if listeners come away from this and they're keen to experiment with it, you know, in the knowledge, like you said, that it is likely that you're going to end up spending more, and the key is to figure out where is that spend going and what are the results that we're getting for that additional spend. But is there any kind of one piece of advice or kind of recommendation that you'd recommend people take away from this conversation today and think about if they are planning to go ahead with this kind of strategy?
Yeah, I think I would say you don't have to go from 0 to 100. It's very much a journey. So I would look at it more of like map out where you're at currently and where you want to get to, which ultimately is that fully demand-led approach. And what are the steps that you need to take to get there, and kind of break it down like that. So if you get £10,000 a month to spend every month and there's no phasing within that, okay, do the work to show the business. Well, if we phased our budget strategically, we spent 4K in this month, but can't do that math, 16K in another month. God, that's embarrassing. We could actually drive so much more because the ROAS is so much higher in this month. There's so much more demand and opportunity. If you have a phased budget, but you're leaving loads of opportunity on the table because you're hitting a ROAS target, but you're constantly hitting your budget caps, then it becomes about proactively forecasting to show the opportunity that's on the table, right? If we spent an extra £1 million this year, we could drive you an extra £10 million. You're leaving that opportunity on the table. If you're at a point where you just don't understand what profitability looks like for your business, what should the ROAS target be? Go and have that conversation. But you're not going to come into this from day one and have all the answers. So it's very much about going through that journey. As we say, upskill the people you need to upskill, bring in the stakeholders that you need to bring in, get the data to back up what you need to say, and really take the business on that journey with you to hopefully get you to that final point, because ultimately the goal is to drive more value for the business. So everyone should get behind that.
Yeah. I think that's the perfect place to wrap things up. And I just want to say thank you again, Lucy, for joining us. And I think people find that strategy really useful. I think if they haven't experimented much with it before, it's definitely worth testing. But before we go, is there anything else you'd like to mention or let people know about?
I think just the main thing, if people do have any questions or do want to talk about all things demand-led bidding, just drop me a message on LinkedIn, reach out and we can have a chat.
Perfect. And hopefully we will be collaborating again on more content in the future. Lucy, it's been a pleasure.
Thanks
for joining us.
Thank you.
That's it for this episode of the Paid Media Lab. Thank you for tuning in. If you found it helpful, hit the subscribe button to get the next episode as soon as it's released. Subscribing costs nothing. It only takes a few seconds to do, but it makes a huge difference to us because it enables us to continue booking the best possible guests and delivering you great content. In the meantime, if you're looking for more free guides, tips, and tools, head to lunio.ai and click on the resources tab in the nav bar. And lastly, if you know any other marketers who'd find these strategies helpful, please do tell them about the show, and I'll see you in the next episode.